you doing in CSP back then?
Back then I don't know, I can't even remember what I was doing. Yeah, I mean it would have been like 6 years ago. I've been here a long time.
How many years?
On and off for maybe 15 years. Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. I can have your attention. First thing I'd like to say is to welcome our colleague Jacob Dalal, who just arrived from Israel. And Jacob will be presenting during the week, and he'll be around, and was in charge of academic affairs for the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, and has been involved with ISGAP for many years, so it's great that he's here. So I'll be very brief. I think we're very fortunate to be here at the CST. The CST, the Community Security Trust, is really the preeminent security organization, certainly in the Jewish world and perhaps internationally. They do a lot of work helping with security of other communities as well. I know the Sikh community and Muslim communities against different forms of discrimination and the threats. And we've been coming to the CST since the beginning of the Summer Institute. Mike Wine, who's one of the founders of the CST, is an old friend and colleague who helped us establish this, as Harris has been involved with the CST over the years as well.
Since 2005.
Since 2005, when I was about 5 or 6 years old. And I remember as a kid doing my master's degree in the UK, reading Searchlight magazine. Searchlight was sort of this anti-fascist magazine that would come out, I think, once a month or something, but it was really like an anti-racist, anti-fascist, and Mike was involved in this. And I think the CST kind of grew out of this group of people fighting more kind of right-wing fascist racism and anti-Semitism. And now, 40, 50 years later, the world has changed. There's all sorts of threats. Harris speaks about the triple threat: the radical right, the radical left, and religious extremism or political Islam. And I think the CST is really at the forefront of securing the Jewish community throughout the United Kingdom, and they'll explain more what they do. But it's a very important institution. And I remember the first time we came here at the CST, when we first did our Summer Institute, was 9 years ago. And 9 years ago, a lot of scholars thought what we were doing in looking at contemporary anti-Semitism was sort of Zionist propaganda. That anti-Semitism really wasn't an issue. The demonization of Israel wasn't a form of anti-Semitism, but it was political. And Israel and the Zionist regime was a racist regime. And that anti-Semitism was not an issue in Europe and North America and throughout the world. But what ISGAP was doing was Zionist propaganda. And we would bring them to the CST, and when they would see the threat of the Jewish community in a major international democratic country and city like London in the United Kingdom, that would sort of begin to shift their thinking that maybe we weren't just giving propaganda, but we were doing serious academic work and looking at the emergence of anti-Semitism and all forms of sort of the reemergence of different forms of hatreds. Fast forward to 2022, and I don't think there's anybody in this room that has to be convinced that anti-Semitism is a real issue. And maybe it's good that people now see the threat and are beginning to understand the threat. But on the other hand, it's kind of unfortunate that in 2022, we have to fight just to protect basic humanity and basic decency. So these issues, unfortunately, are becoming more and more urgent. And I think we're very fortunate to be at the CST, so thank you for welcoming us, and we look forward to your presentations and hear about the excellent and vital work that you guys are doing. Thank you.
Can I just say something? Yeah. On a personal note, Charles mentioned that I've been involved in some capacity with CST since 2005. After 7/7, the terrorist bombings here in 2005, I decided to take a stand and worked on the prevent strategy, which was the CVE strategy. And what the CST did, and it was Mike Wine in those days, was Mike Wine actually mentored me. He took me to one side, taught me about security, taught me about political engagement, because I didn't know. So from a personal perspective, as a Muslim, tackling terrorism and extremism against in those days, it was predominantly Islamist, and I'll talk about Islamist Islam on my lecture. CST was at the forefront of not just looking after the Jewish community, but also after somebody and other people who are Muslims and helping and teaching us. And the other thing I want to say is that there is such a thing, as I mentioned the other day, as anti-Muslim hatred. And I don't know, Johnny, if you're going to talk about Talmama, but I just wanted to say. So the UK government took a decision rightly a few years ago to help tackle anti-Muslim hatred in the UK. There were no mechanisms, no systems in place. And there was a colleague of mine, Fayaz Mughal, who set up something called Talmama, monitoring anti-Muslim attacks. We didn't call it Islamophobia, as I mentioned. Talmama is doing some interesting things. He's no longer involved, different things, but perhaps I may not agree with. But the principle of tackling anti-Muslim hatred was very important. The government took it very seriously. And the people that actually helped us set up the infrastructure, the systems, the processes, was CST. So CST is not just directly involved in security for the Jewish community, but it's actually the bedrock and the foundation of actually helping Muslims, working with the government and the police, monitoring anti-Muslim attacks as well. And without CST, we wouldn't have been able to do it. So thank you for that, Johnny.
Thank you. Thank you, Haras. Thank you, Charles. It's good to welcome old friends back to Shield House, and also new friends, of course. I think Jonathan Spy was supposed to be here. I did see his name. Is Jonathan here now?
Yeah, I think he's left, unfortunately.
Okay,
he's
fine.
around London, so.
Fine. So yeah, I mean, Jonathan has been here, so it makes sense that this is the event that he skips because he's familiar with us. But apart from that, I'm not sure how familiar you are with us. So first of all, I want to say welcome. Second of all, I want to say thank you to Charles and Haras for completely stealing my thunder and saying everything that I was going to say, but that suits me very nicely because I'm just back from 2 weeks in Portugal where I've been on the beach with my wife and my kids, so my head is not in the game this morning. So thank you. The same also goes to my colleague Elliot, who's come back from 2 weeks in Spain this morning. He's giving a presentation a little bit earlier, but we're joined this morning by colleagues. I just saw Lauren walk in, so Lauren is a colleague over there. She works in our incidents team with my other colleague Sam. Put your hand up, Sam, who's giving a presentation, and alongside Yoni, who's also giving a short presentation, and my colleague Elliot here, who's also giving a 20-minute presentation, and my other colleague Mark was here. He's not here. But he's not here anymore. He's our head of investigations and is part of our research team as well. So that's a very brief introduction to us. 2 minutes on housekeeping. Tea, coffee, fruit, soft drinks, water is all over there. Please help yourself at any stage. It's fine. Yeah, thank you. Toilets outside in the lobby. If an alarm goes, just look at Sam and she'll tell us exactly what to do because we have different alarms for different things. Right, thanks, Sam. And then I also want to start with apologies. So apologies from our Chief Executive, Mark Gardner, who really wanted to be here because I know how much he values the relationship that we have with ISGAP and long-standing relationship that Charles outlined earlier. He wanted to be here now giving this brief introduction because he understands the value of getting our point across, of engaging with more people, of bringing people into our sphere and our understanding and having these really important conversations. Unfortunately, he has COVID symptoms this morning. He was at a wedding 6 days ago, so he didn't want to take any risks. But he's okay, so that's why he's not here. So it's a very legitimate reason and why I'm standing in for him this morning. So a little bit about me. I'm Johnny Newton. I'm the Head of Government Relations and External Affairs at CST. I've been here, I'm one of the long-timers. I've been here on and off for quite a few years in various different guises, and now I lead on engaging with government and engaging with parliamentarians, engaging with other Jewish organisations, communal organisations, and other organisations we work with quite closely outside of the Jewish community. So I know significant social media platforms, for example, in order to better represent the Jewish community and CST and the things that we stand for. I am going to give really just 5-10 minutes on who we are, what we do. It's going to end with a brief animation which gives a little bit of the history of CST that Charles was talking about a little bit earlier. And then, how long have we got, El Shaddai? When do we have to be gone by? Is it 11:30?
About 11:30.
Okay. 11:30. All right. So Elliot's going to do 20 minutes. He is a senior analyst, again a long timer, has been here a very long time. He's the head of our research and analysis team, where we proactively look at anti-Semitism and proactively look at anti-Semitic threats in the UK. So he'll be giving an overall threat briefing about how we see the threat towards the Jewish community in the UK at the moment. And do an introduction to something which is really exciting and really important that we launched a few weeks ago, which is a terrorism database for plots and foiled plots in the UK, where there has been terrorist involvement. And we developed this database because nothing like this, to our understanding, had been developed beforehand. And it's a resource in a similar way to what Harath was talking about, that we obviously have a focus on the Jewish community and anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic threats, but we don't have a purely myopic view. We try and look wider, and we recognise that a lot of the work that we can do can benefit other people. So you, as researchers, academics, this might be something that you might find of interest to in the work that you continue to do. Then Sam Lethbridge, who leads up our anti-Semitic incidents team, is going to be talking a bit about how anti-Semitic incidents manifest themselves in a general perspective here in the UK. And then Yoni is going to be about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, is one of our lead analyst of anti-Semitic incidents, and is the author of our anti-Semitic incidents reports, which are kind of the bedrock of the analysis that we provide. We'll be doing about 10 or 15 minutes looking in more detail at anti-Semitism over the last 6 months, because we've just produced a report. By the way, all of our reports that I mentioned are going to be over there as well, so you can pick up any of that literature that you want. And then we're going to go downstairs, and Charles spoke about the central elements and the centrality of our role in the physical protection and the protective security of the Jewish community because of these threats that we face, and the hub of that is our control room. So we will be going down and trying to squeeze into a much smaller conference room in order to see how our control centre works, and we've got CCTV that ranges from Glasgow, right, where Ben's from, or even further north, maybe Aberdeen, all the way down to Bournemouth, and from the east of the UK straight through to the west of the UK. So it's about, I think, 5,000 cameras from about 500 locations, all feed into a central control room that we manage. And I think it's a really interesting thing to see, to understand how we operate. And I guess we'll head down there probably about 10 past 11. Is that okay with you with regards to timings? Yeah, so we'll have like 15 or 20 minutes there. Great. So, very, very briefly, that's me, who CST is, what we are. We are an organisation that's ostensibly responsible for the security of the Jewish community, and we do that in several different ways. One is that we advise the Jewish community on protective security measures at either their places of worship or Jewish schools, or community buildings. So as you would have come in this morning, you would have noticed there are security guards outside, there is CCTV, there are double doors, blast doors. All of that is very common, quite sadly, but importantly, across Jewish communal locations in the UK. And that is not unusual to see that, and CST helps pay for that. And it helps advise Jewish community locations how to establish that. And we work across all of the Jewish community, about 270 to 300,000 Jews in the UK, from the north to the south, to the east to the west, as I mentioned, but also across all different denominations. So we work with progressive liberal Jews straight through to ultra-Orthodox, Haredi, Lubavitch, Black Hat Jews as well. And we're probably the only Jewish communal organisation that has that breadth and has that scope. quite a lot of Jewish organisations will be, again, quite focused in who they engage with, and we try as best as possible to service the entire Jewish community, no matter what their background or how they identify as being Jewish. We also train members of the Jewish community to what we think is an important standard to help provide physical man guarding at their places of worship or at their children's schools or wherever it may be. And we have a roster of around 2,000 trained volunteers in the UK that will help man guard those locations, and also will help guard Jewish events at non-Jewish locations. So if there is a Jewish event at Trafalgar Square, for example, we will work hand in hand with the police in order to help guard something like that, because not only do we protect Jewish life, we also seek to protect the Jewish way of life. Right? We want the Jewish community to feel comfortable wearing their kippah, to identify publicly as Jews, to have a confident Jewish life, an open Jewish life as possible. But we feel, and the community to some extent, or to a lot of extent, feels that they can only do that from a place of security as well. So that is fundamentals of our security operation. And then another key thing of that is that we manage a very significant grant from the government, which has been running for several years now, which helps pay for commercial security guarding, predominantly at Jewish schools, but also at other Jewish community locations as well. And that's been running, at the moment it runs at £14 million a year, and it's been running at that level for the last 3 or 4 years, but previously it ran from 2010 from a smaller grant. And we administer that on behalf of government, which again is a key element of Jewish communal security in the UK. Another element which is key to what I mentioned earlier is that engagement with police, and that knocks on to our engagement with local authorities, our engagement with government. You will see from our animation that we started in a very different way, but we work extremely closely with police, from the highest levels down to very local street levels. Sam, as instance manager, will be engaging daily with hate crime officers. Our trustees, our senior leadership will be working with the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, and there is complete transparency with regards to how we operate and what we do, and that's the same with government as well. So I engage daily with the Home Office, with the DLUC, the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities now. We work closely with the Ministry of Justice, we work closely with the Prime Minister's Office, with the Cabinet Office, engaging and sharing best practice and working with government as openly as possible. And there was a whole load of other work that Haras touched on as well, which is becoming increasingly important to us as well. So I mentioned earlier that our focus is on the Jewish community, but it doesn't end with the Jewish community. That's been working on an ad hoc basis. So Haras very rightly spoke about that really important work that we did with Tel Mama. Haras said that we helped set Tel Mama up. That's true, but actually very quickly that relationship became very bilateral, right? We received just as much support and help from a newer, more dynamic organisation that was looking at hate crime as we provided them. And we both grew as a result, and we work really closely with the LGBT community, with other faith communities, again working to help develop a anti-hate crime community. And then more recently we've been taking that a bit more seriously. The tragic attacks in Christchurch in 2019. I'm sure you'll all be aware, Brenton Tarrant shot over 50 members of the Muslim community at 2 different mosques in Christchurch in New Zealand. That was followed shortly by attacks in Sri Lanka against churches, if you recall, on Easter Sunday 2019. Yeah. And what happened is that all of a sudden other faith communities and other minority communities started thinking, hold on a second, our places of worship aren't sacrosanct anymore. People are attacking them. We need to start thinking more seriously about protective security measures at our places of worship. So either they knew of us, so they came to us, or they went to the police, or they went to local authorities, or they went to the Home Office, and they would all go, you need to talk to CST because these people have been doing it for 40 years and they're the experts of that. So we were inundated in requests, and as a result we set up, manned, staffed now by 3 people, a program called SAFE. It stands for Security Advice for Everyone, where we provide webinars and seminars for other communities, where we basically say, these are the sorts of challenges we face as a Jewish community, these are the sorts of things that we had to consider and the things that we put into place to try and mitigate against those challenges. These are the sorts of things that you may want to do, and these are the resources that you can use that might be able to help you do that. And again, we're proactively engaging with government on faith security training and all this sort of stuff, where we can feed our expertise into wider networks and to wider communities, which is really important. And then finally, another important thing that we also do, and we did this, set this up with Tel Mama as well, is working on education. We have a program called Stand Up, which is staffed by Muslim and Jewish educators that go into schools, and they talk about anti-Muslim hatred, they talk about anti-Semitism, they talk about hate crime to young people. They model cross-communal cohesion, which is important to model, sadly, because recently, it was not so recent, but there are stresses on community cohesion for various reasons. And to be able to talk to young people about these issues, because we are seeing, worryingly, and this might come up in Yoni's presentation, a trend for younger people to engage in anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred as well. That's me. Obviously, I've gone over my 5-10 minutes. I apologise to my colleagues. I'll be stricter with you than I have been with myself with regards to timekeeping. I'm pretty sure I've covered all of these things that I've gone. Okay, so we're funded by the Jewish community, and we're of the Jewish community, and that goes into a bit about our staff. Obviously, you can see that we've got quite a big network, quite a big setup. We've got over 90 staff, 2,000 volunteers, 3 offices. This is our head office in Manchester, office in Leeds. So I'm going to go to Sam. You're trying to say something to me. Yeah. I'm gonna show you this animation that goes into a little bit more detail about who we are. It's quite cute. It was for fundraising purposes, so we did it a couple of years ago. We take chaps, backs, anything from my friend there will be there with a bucket, dollars, euros, Turkish lira, and obviously I'm joking. But it might have a slight fundraising slant to it. And then afterwards, we're going to go to my colleague Elliot. Do I need to do anything?
You have to press play at the bottom.
There's that on there. Thank you. Thank you.
Papal Street, 1936. London's East End Jews fought back against the fascists. 3 years later, Britain fought the Nazis. But when the war ended, Jewish servicemen and women returned home and were appalled to see fascists once more. These Jews formed street fighting groups and continued the tradition of standing up against racism, against anti-Semitism, which shockingly continued even in the aftermath of the Holocaust. The lessons had been learned. These activists knew they had to take matters into their own hands to protect their families, their communities, and these were the roots of CST, Community Security Trust, where hundreds of Jewish men and women, young and old, from every corner of the community stand up to protect Jewish life in the UK, from our Jewish schools to shuls to university campuses, to our communal events and our daily lives. As the years have passed, CST's work has evolved. The organisation has developed and professionalised into a registered charity, constantly adapting to the changing nature of the threats that the Jewish community faces. From the oldest hatred to terrorism in all of its deadly forms. The work doesn't only involve physical security, but behind-the-scenes research too. CST seldom publicises it, but anti-Semites are identified, exposed, and often arrested and convicted. This includes on terrorism charges every year. Today, CST is a global leader of its type, with over 2,000 volunteers and staff working closely with the government and police. And while we might look a little different to those hardened fighters of years gone by, to this very day, we're guided by the exact same principles that motivated those who came before us. To stand up against anti-Semitism and terrorism, protect our Jewish community, and safeguard Jewish life.
Is that for me or the video? Okay. I don't actually have any slides. I'm just going to talk to you, but I will show you this database that Johnny mentioned before. But before that, I just want to just explain a little bit about the department that I work in and what we do and how we do it, because we have evolved over the last few years. We were kind of called different things, our department, but now we're under a kind of a bigger umbrella department internally known as P&D, and that is split into a number of smaller teams. My team is research and analysis, and alongside our open source intelligence team, our OSINT team, and also investigations that our colleague Mark, who was here a little bit earlier, is involved with. And these other teams, like investigations and the OSINT team, their job is to gather information, and especially with OSINT team, that's open source intelligence. So that is the monitoring and the retrieval of information online about extremism, anti-Semitism and terrorism. So these analysts are looking all the time, and if you came to our ground floor now, you would see them on their laptops. And we use some software that helps us do it automatically as well. And this software looks at around 95 million websites, and it also looks at Facebook, Twitter in real time as well. And it allows us, through searching, to look at various different manifestations of extremism and terrorism and anti-Semitism. Because the brief is basically, this is what we're looking for. We're looking out for forms of extremism and anti-Semitism, specifically anti-Semitism, because that's our remit. But whilst doing that, we are looking at other forms of extremism and terrorism as well. And on that video, it mentioned about the fact that something we don't often publicise, but it's kind of coming out a little bit more all the time, which is that this OSINT team is picking up information about individuals who we feel are moving in the direction of not just kind of promoting extremism, but are moving in a violent direction. It might be that they are that they have firearms and that they're taking photos of themselves with firearms. It could be that they are inciting others to violence. These individuals, we feel, when they overstep that mark into possible criminal acts, we will then pass that information on to counter-terrorism police. And we have good relations with CT police here, and we pass that information on to them. It's not publicised a lot of the time. Sometimes it might end up in the press, but a lot of the time it's not. We will pass information on about individuals who we feel have stepped over the line, and we leave it to them. It's their job. They will then investigate. If they feel that those individuals have a case to answer, they will be arrested and tried and hopefully convicted if they have broken the law. And that is an important part of the work that the group around kind of OSINT does. My team is research and analysis, and what we do is we take the raw information that these colleagues around me collect every day, and we try to make sense of it, and we try to build a picture with that information. It's what we call a rolling threat assessment. What we're trying to do is we're trying to see where the threats to the Jewish community come from on an everyday basis, and we're building that picture constantly. It's like a puzzle. We get little bits of information that build up that puzzle all the time, and it's trying to make sense of that picture, because that picture isn't static. That picture changes all of the time. Okay? When I started some 27 years ago here at CST, the biggest threat was Nazis on the streets, basically. Now, there were other threats going on, but that was the predominant threat that we had. And then obviously I was here during 9/11, during 7/7, all through that whole threat that built up around jihadist extremism. And so that threat picture changed, clearly. And now, over the last few years, we've seen that threat picture change again and evolve. And right-wing extremists, unfortunately, have moved ever more into the direction of terrorist threat. So my team, research and analysis, take that raw information and we try to build those pictures. And what do we do with that? Well, we try and write it up. We try and write reports, and we try and get those reports out to the wider world. It could be that it's just informing staff here of what the picture is, but we try to get that information a little bit further out as well. And so we've started sending out, what we do is we create a monthly product called a threat update. That is a kind of summary of what's been going on around extremism and terrorism. And that goes out to staff members, but also further out as well, to some of Johnny's government contacts, to some of our police officer contacts, to try to get the message of what's going on generally. We also produce threat assessments for Jewish holidays and pass that information over to police, because police officers are trying, based on what resource they have, to help with the security of the community. So, for example, we're coming up to the High Holy Days quite quickly, actually, and it comes up very quickly. We produce a threat assessment for the High Holy Days, amongst other important Jewish festivals as well. And we do this because we want the police to have an understanding of what that festival, what that set of festivals means to the Jewish community, and what it means for a security point of view. What it means is, here in the UK, is that thousands, tens of thousands of Jewish people will go to synagogue during the High Holy Day period, and will therefore be walking on the streets in areas around here, Hendon, Golders Green, Stanmore, Edgware, Bournemouth, Radlett. There are areas of high concentration of Jews, Stamford Hill. And we want the police to know that on these High Holy Days, there will be thousands of Jews on the streets going to and from synagogues. And it's important that they know that. And it's important because we know from experience that extremist and terrorist groups believe that the Jewish community should be a target for their hatred and for their violence. And we know this from history. And we know this from the work that we do. And we continue to build that picture. We also write what are called research briefings. So last year, of course, we had a conflict between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, which led to a huge spike in anti-Semitic incidents, and my colleagues will talk about this, I'm sure, we'll mention it. But from our point of view, in our department, we wanted to get the message out there wider about what happened during this, what we dubbed the month of hate. Because it wasn't just that anti-Semitic incidents went up, it was that incitement and hatred of Jews went up during that period as well. We had demonstrations, a lot of demonstrations in the UK for the Palestinian cause, and that's, of course, absolutely fine. People have the right to protest here and have the right to voice their views on their cause. But where we come into it is when they overstep that line from supporting a cause to anti-Semitism. That's where we step in, and we monitored those protests, and we did see anti-Semitism on some of them, by some of those that took place, not all of them. And so we wanted to document all that, and it's quite thick booklet that, unfortunately, because a lot went on during that period of time, it was quite a concentrated period of time. But this was put together by my colleague in my team. So this is the kind of thing that we will produce, and this went further out to government, to police forces, and to various other people in the community and outside the community. So this is the kind of thing that my department produces, my little team. As Johnny mentioned earlier, this is something that we've been thinking about putting together for some time. The two databases on terrorist plots in the UK and terror attacks in the UK. Since around 2013, my colleague and I have been doing it basically by hand. So every time that there was a plot, every time that there was an attack, we would basically make a note of it. And the reason why we do this is because part of our remit is to look at terrorist attacks in the aftermath and plots, and work out what happened and why it happened, and what lessons we can draw from those incidents to help better protect the Jewish community. Okay? If you have a security officer standing outside of this building trying to do their best to protect this building, if they know what the threat entails, what that person, if somebody decides to attack this building, what that threat is going to look like. What's the terrorist going to look like? What are they going to be dressed as? What modus operandi are they going to take on when they attack? What weapons are they going to use? Which direction do you think they're going to come from? What is what we call a staging post? So they set up nearby, in the nearby area, in order to get themselves together, get themselves ready themselves before they actually make that attack. Importantly for us, hostile reconnaissance is really, really important, which is this concept that aspiring terrorists will go to their target and do research, will look for security cameras, will look for security guards, will walk around that area. This is a really important way that if you can find them and work out that they are doing this hostile reconnaissance, it's a really good way of trying to stop a possible attack in an early stage. And we know that virtually all terrorists will do hostile reconnaissance of some kind, either physical or online or both. So this area of our work is really important. We study what happens when terrorists attack a target, and what we can learn, what lessons we can draw out from each attack, and we could give that information to our security officers and to our training department as well. Because if we know, for example, that terrorists at the moment are more likely to use knives to attack, it's really important that we give that information to our training department, who will then train up our security volunteers and security guards, and so they know what the latest trends are in terrorism. This is our foiled terrorist attack plots database, and basically we try to make it quite easy on the eye and very accessible. You put in a key term if you want to do a search, and you can do dates and ideology. You have all these different sections that you can search on. And if you just go down a second, thank you. Each plot is then listed, and if you click on the instant summary, it brings up the main kind of basic summary of what happened there, and there is a more detailed summary here with links to articles which will show you if you want to know more of those about those at the time. It gives little information because, of course, we're CST. We want to know about anti-Jewish targeting or anti-Jewish sentiment, but you can search on a number of these particular parts of it, and we hope that it's a resource that researchers, academics, police officers, security, people involved in security, anyone. It's on our website, it's open, it's free, you don't need to register or anything like that. You just go to our website and it's on the research tab at the top right, and at the bottom of that you will see it will say databases. Yeah, there. And we also listed the terrorist attacks that have taken place in the UK. This is from 2013 to the present day. We hope to populate it backwards as well, but 2013 was when when the police started telling us, the general public, when plots were taking place and naming and listing them, so we've gone back to that time, from that time onwards. We will do it forwards as well whenever there is another threat, a plot that takes place or a terrorist attack going forward. The reason why we think it's important is because there is nothing like this in the UK. We have an individual mandated by Parliament to look over terrorist legislation every year. That individual does not have access to the plots. There is no central database that is telling this person, and it's unbelievable. But we know from having spoken to him, he doesn't, MI5 do not give him access to the actual raw data. He doesn't have it. So he's literally, and his office has to do what we do and write it on paper. But we feel that this is a resource that therefore other people can use. All right, so if you're interested in this and you want to know more and you want to do some searching, please do. So in the remaining time, 5 minutes. In the remaining 5 minutes, just very briefly, just as a summary of where we see the threats to the Jewish community coming from as we stand at the moment. I talked about the threat from the extreme right. and how that has kind of changed over years and undulated. And we are living in what some organisations, anti-racist organisations, have called a post-organisational situation at the moment. When I started, there was the National Front, there was the British National Party, there was all of these kind of far-right hate groups that were around. You do not see them that much anymore, because basically people are online, and it's global, obviously. So we have a global far-right network which pumps out propaganda and incitement to attack. And who is their number one target? Unfortunately, it's the Jewish community. For historical reasons, their hatred of Jews continues to this day. And so the Jewish community is high up on the list of targets for far-right extremists, and continues to be. But one trend that we've been seeing over the last couple of years is extremely young individuals going online and unfortunately being radicalised. And some of them being radicalised to the most extreme form of far-right extremism. So the really nasty, neo-Nazi, satanic, paedophile end of the scale, and really kind of deep hatred of Jews as well. And we're seeing these individuals not just being radicalised, but moving towards that kind of terrorist situation as well. So a number of them have been arrested. Some of them have been tried and convicted as well. And we're talking 13, 14, 15, 16-year-olds. Okay, and obviously COVID and lockdowns did not help this. And the police and security services have been saying this for a while now, that situation meant obviously people being indoors on their laptops all the time. And so that situation didn't help. So right-wing extremism continues to be a large threat to the Jewish community. Jihadist extremism, jihadist terrorism, however you want to say it, Salafi jihadist terrorism, whatever term you want to use, there are still these individuals and groupings that still want to target Jews. And Haras, I know you'll probably talk about that side of things. I understand another time. But the fact is that ISIS, and before them Al-Qaeda, and their affiliate groups, and all of those that have been inspired by them to commit attacks, unfortunately, have all seen the Jewish community as being high up on their list of targets. And we have seen attacks on Jewish communities across the world since 9/11. In fact, the first successful terrorist attack after 9/11 was against a synagogue in Jerba in Tunisia. Those threats to the Jewish community from that direction continue to this day. And during times of conflict between Israel and Hamas, or Israel and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, whoever it may be, we still see incitement and threats from those sources being pumped out across the world. Iran and Hezbollah represent another threat that continues against the Jewish community. We know that Iran and its proxy groups like Hezbollah, like the Quds Force group, have all carried out attacks against Jewish and Israeli targets across the world for decades now. They continue to plot. We believe that they carry out what I mentioned before, hostile reconnaissance. They are looking for targets to attack, and we know that they have carried out hostile reconnaissance on Jewish communities across the world. And we believe that at any moment they could, if they wished to, attack Jewish communities, and have done in the past, and will continue to look for opportunities. And just kind of finally from me, one of the threads that I'm sure that you're aware of and will be learning about, where anti-Semitism is a major part of that thread, are conspiracy theories. And there's a lot of this that we've done a lot of research over the years. And we've written about it because of COVID. It also fed into this, and a report that I wrote that was very recently, and it's on the table over there, looks at conspiracy theories amongst the COVID conspiracy movement. But we know that it's not just COVID. We know that conspiracy theories have been around for a long time. But it's that thread of anti-Semitism that runs right through them, where unfortunately these individuals believe that there is this kind of satanic force at the top, run by Jews, that it is running everything, or is at fault for everything that goes wrong in the world. So that is something that we also keep an eye on. So that is where we see at the moment the threats to the Jewish community. As I said, it's an ongoing thing that we are constantly evolving that threat picture. Happy to take any questions at the end or now.
I mean, we can do a couple of questions now.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so this is a really fascinating project that you've got going on here. I was wondering what the internal discussion on the issue of exposure is. You mentioned earlier the Christchurch attack. I'm sure you're familiar with the initiative that came out of that, the Don't Name Them, Don't Show Them initiative. The role of media exposure and network contagion. I was wondering if there's maybe discussion about whether or not it's a good thing to put all of this information. I went and looked at your database, and you're publishing their names and information about their ideology. And obviously the intention is for government officials, security officials, and that sort of thing to be using this information, but the public has access to all of this as well. Is there internal debate about the pros and cons of this project?
It's a really good point, actually. It's a really good question, and I am aware of that whole debate around whether you should name individuals who have perpetrated terrorist attacks. I mean, from our point of view, it's a little bit different. We're not we're not journalists, you know, from a personal point of view, I would support that whole thing where you don't name those individuals, because then it just it gives them what they want. But we're here to research anti-Semitism, and we're here to explain to as many people as possible what the threat is to the Jewish community. And so we have to kind of name that threat, and so to avoid mentioning the name of this person or that person wouldn't really work for us, I think. But yeah, certainly from a journalistic point of view, I get it, but we have to be very specific about that threat, and we have to understand it as best as we can. So we do talk about individuals, we do mention them, because we want as best an understanding of what drove that person to do that as possible. Okay?
It's a conversation that we have across all of our work, not just the research and analysis. We will always ask ourselves what is good for the Jewish community, right? We will always present information and analysis as we see it. We don't sugarcoat things. If things are bad, we'll say they're bad. If things are better, we'll say they're better. And we present our stats as honestly as we can. Without trying to put a spin on it for political reasons or whatever it may be, but we also are always, across all of the work that we do, we have to consider how we draw that fine line between ensuring that the Jewish community is security aware and that they are alarmed. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier, right? Protecting Jewish life, but also protecting the Jewish way of life, right? And that whole debate guides all of our public comms, all of our comms to the Jewish community, everything that we do. Slightly different from the specific angle that you're looking at, that you're talking about, but we do think about it quite deeply.
Should I just take one more for the moment?
Sorry, yeah.
Go ahead.
Firstly, I want to thank you. I'm a British Jew, it's just a couple of us. Went to a Jewish school, go every week to synagogue, and if it weren't for CST, my school and my synagogue wouldn't have any protection. So thank you. But just a question about the data. Whilst I completely accept the far-right threat remains alive and well, I mean, Pittsburgh, Fourway and Halle in Germany and elsewhere, I think there is a fundamental question of scale here. Again, I'm not trying to diminish from the seriousness of far-right threat, having any Nazi threat myself, but the fact is, whilst Al-Qaeda and other Islamist terror groups are not necessarily, perhaps are not as organisations plotting against Jewish community institutions, as much as Nazi groups, the fact is that there is an atmosphere or a hospitable environment within large parts of our Muslim communities in which anti-Semitism is normalised and routine. And for most Jewish students, myself included, the things which we are most disturbed by is far left extremism and Islamism. Far right activity on campus is basically non-existent. I've never encountered it, and I worked around campus education and stuff. I've not seen, and I'm very active in campaigning against anti-Semitism on the streets of the UK. Far right anti-Semitism honestly remains small. The things which cause us the most trouble is far left extremism and Islamism, not just for students, but I would say for Jews around the country.
Okay, so thank you for your remarks. This is a big topic, and I don't want to eat into too much time for Sam and Johnny, for Yoni as well, because it's not fair. But look, we're looking. You have a point, and I understand that. And when we're talking about campus, for example, it's a little bit of a different animal as well. So the threats to Jews on campuses is a little bit different, and we have specialists who look at the threat, and we publish figures on the threat to Jewish students. So that side of things is a little bit different. But when we're talking about the threat to the community, we're talking about who is more likely to target a synagogue or a Jewish school from a terrorist point of view. Okay, that's what most worries us, and what we try to mitigate against as best as we can. Okay, and far left extremism, of course, we had the Corbyn years and etc. That it was a very uncomfortable time for most British Jews who were very worried. But the fact is that, you know, the threat that turns up outside of a synagogue building or a school is less likely to be that, and much more likely to be either a far right terrorist who is going to be dressed up in military fatigues with a camera on, trying to film what he's about to do, or it's going to be a jihadist extremist who has been incited to attack Jews. So that's in I hope in kind of summary. But yeah, these are complicated issues, and I'm not pretending that those are that there is, you know, these are easy things to pigeonhole. But we try and look at the different ideologies and where that threat is, and as I say, it's an ongoing process. We will always look at the evidence and try and present it. All right. Happy to have these discussions afterwards as well.
You raise very important questions, and it's the general questions about the atmosphere that the Jewish community find themselves in. And again, you know, we were very vocal over far left anti-Semitism over the Corbyn years, continued far left anti-Semitism. I think you make a very important point about the hospitality. I like the way that you framed it, the hospitality of anti-Semitism within large sections of the Muslim community. And this is something that is a concern, something that we're alive to, and I do agree that we need to, first of all, find ways of being able to talk about it.
Right.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah. We can we make? I saw the other people had their hands up as well. I'm just really worried, El Shaddai, about our timing.
We have until 11:30.
Okay. So if you want to come to
It's a very short question. I want to ask if CST, what kind of organization? It's a NGO?
Charity.
Yeah.
Can I ask also a short question about volunteers? I'm absolutely surprised, you know, that you have about 2,000 volunteers. What does it mean to be volunteer in your organization? And is it difficult for you to find new volunteers? Thank you.
There's always a challenge around volunteers, but we find that mainly the Jewish community and people who are engaged with Jewish communal activity, you would have heard from, sorry, what was your name?
Harry.
You would have heard from Harry, right, your colleague here, that the CST has been central to his schooling, to his synagogue going, so it's part of the body politic of Jewish communal life, right? It's an essential part of that, so people are aware of CST from a very young age. At university they would be engaging with CST, and usually it's about recruiting from volunteers from the communities themselves, and then what it consists of is it's a 6-week or 12-week training course.
Changed during COVID, and we had to adapt to the way that our volunteers get trained, but essentially it used to be a 12-week course where they would learn the whole spectrum of the theory of security as well as the physical element of it. and there was certain criteria they have to meet. You can't just turn up and say, I want to become a CST volunteer. There's a whole training course with qualified instructors, and then ongoing expectations for training as well, be that theory or physical training, to evolve their knowledge as the threat evolves as well.
And so that initial training's for the first rung of the ladder, right? So that's to have to get your card, and then you have different levels of training as well.
We used to go to CST just for advice often. When I was president of the Israel Society, when we had events going on, it wasn't just about having protection, it was consulting about potential risks of doing some events and so on. So yeah.
Right, last one.
Do you have non-Jewish volunteers?
No.
No.
Just a quick practical question. Like I saw on your card it said you have to phone the police first and then phone you guys. So do you not have your own, you don't have your own response?
We do have an own response team, but you're South African?
Yes.
So our relationship with the police is I mean, I lived in South Africa for 2 years, so this is coming from some experience. In general, British public's relationship with police is very different from, let's say, a South African relationship with police, right? And reliance. And so for us, if there's an emergency, always call the police. Because they will respond, and they will respond better, they will respond first. We can also respond, and we can help support that process, but it will always be call the police. With regards to anti-Semitic incidents, we encourage people to report it to us and to police, and this is where SAND comes in. Right? And some people like reporting it to CST, some people like reporting it to police, some people report to both, right? And police and CST also have information sharing agreements, whereby we will share the information with each other, so that both the police figures and CST figures are with us.
Okay, thank you. So I've got about 20 minutes, and I'm looking at Johnny, and he's trying to get me to cut that down to 15. So I'm going to speak really, really quickly and try and get through as much information as I can as possible. And I apologise if I speak too quickly, but I know that time's kind of running away with us. So my role is the Incidents Department Manager, and I'm responsible for a team here in London that comprises of victim support caseworkers, social media caseworkers, and Yoni as our data analyst, who you're going to hear from after me. The work that we do is really varied, and there's a huge crossover between anti-Semitic incidents and the hostile reconnaissance that Elliot mentioned as well. What I'm going to focus on mainly is the anti-Semitic incidents. The recording of hostile reconnaissance and potential suspicious activity is another part of the work that I oversee as well. But for this, it's primarily about the actual anti-Semitism. So, first of all, our work with the police. We're a trusted partner of the police, and we work with all departments and all ranks. And we sit on various advisory groups, and we're often turned to by the police for advice on anti-Semitism and what is anti-Semitic. We hold a national data sharing agreement with the police, and we speak regularly with our partners, sharing vital information about incidents to ensure that the best outcome happens for the victim. And alongside this, obviously as Johnny has mentioned as well, we also work very closely with local authorities as well as central government. And our relationship with local authorities is key to developing good interfaith relations and working towards eradicating hate of any nature from our streets. We are partners of a programme called CATCH, which stands for the Community Alliance to Combat Hate. We're a group of organisations who have come together to provide specialist support to our individual communities. We're a referral service for the police, so if a victim of a hate crime reports to the police, they then will signpost on to us. And besides CST, the other organisations, as you can see, are Tell Mama for Islamophobic hate crime, Gallup for the LGBTQ+ community, Choice in the Borough of Hackney, the Monitoring Group for Race Hate, Real and Stay Safe for Anti-Disability Hate Crime. We don't get a huge amount of referrals from CATCH, and that's probably to do with the size of our organisation and the size of our community. So in the UK, Jewish community is approximately 300,000. Not a huge community, relatively small. We're waiting for the census results to come out later this year to see what the accurate number is, but it's around 300,000. And us as an organisation, quite a big, well-known organisation. So the majority of the Jewish community know about us in one capacity or another, be that from securing events that they've been to, be that securing their synagogues, or be that from reporting anti-Semitic incidents. So the majority of the reports that we get come directly to us, but we do get the odd referral through the Catch programme as well. We are recognised third-party reporters. So this kind of goes to the lady, sorry, I don't know your name, but you commented about the police. So we're third-party reporters. So if a victim doesn't want to report to the police or isn't able to, then we'll do that report on their behalf. But we're very realistic. If a victim wants to report to the police but doesn't want to be named in that report, so it's anonymous, they have to understand that the chances of an investigation are like non-existent, right? So we will encourage for them to be named in the report, and that's one of the reasons we encourage the victim to report directly to the police, because it's the logical step. They're the victims of the incident. Unfortunately, the mindset is that with a lot of victims, it's so minimal, it's so menial, the incident, you know, getting shouted at, "Oi, Jew boy," or something as they're walking down the street is such a nothing incident in the grand scheme of things when they are thinking about anti-Semitism, that they don't feel it worthwhile to report to the police. But that's the complete opposite. If the police don't know about the incident, then officially it hasn't happened. They can't then do their threat assessment to ensure that things like the work that Elliot's department are doing for the upcoming High Holy Days, everything kind of comes together in one package. So for us, our message is very, very simple. It's see it, report it, stop it. And that doesn't matter if it's anti-Semitism, that can also be for suspicious activity that is potential precursor to an attack against our community. So very, very important. See it, report it, stop it. I'm not going to talk too much about our control room because you're going to go and see that shortly as well, hopefully if time permits. But we get reports from a number of different ways. We'll get from the community directly. We get from witnesses that are third-party reporters to us. And we see them directly happening through our control room. People can report to us on our website. They can report to us via just emailing us, through phone calls, through our volunteer structure as well. So we are approachable in so many different ways. So, moving on to actual anti-Semitism. Obviously you've heard about CST, what we do and how we work. Let's look at what is an anti-Semitic incident. So CST, we define an anti-Semitic incident as any malicious act that's aimed at Jewish people, organisations or property, where there is evidence that the act has anti-Semitic motivation or content, or that the victim was targeted because they are or they are believed to be Jewish. So we will take reports from people that are not Jewish, that have been targeted because the perception is that they are Jewish. It could be that they believe they have stereotypical Jewish features. We have had reports from the Muslim community where the offender just hasn't realised it's irrelevant actually, because we'll still signpost on to tell mama, but they'll contact us because they've had anti-Semitic abuse because they've got a modest head covering on, a hijab, or they're wearing modest clothing, and the perception is that they're Jewish. So they get anti-Semitic abuse, but we'll still signpost them on. We'll record that as our incident, but we will still signpost those people on to tell mama so they get more bespoke support as well. So it is a narrower definition than that used by the criminal justice system, which is perception-led. So that has come about because of the Macpherson report into the Stephen Lawrence murder that you're probably all aware of, that happened many years ago, where Stephen's family were saying he was targeted because he was black, and the police were saying no, because he was black, he obviously had done something wrong, which was not the case at all, and we know that he was purely targeted in a race hate attack. And the investigation into the police handling of that therefore led to recommendations, which is that if a victim perceives an incident to be motivated by hate, that's how the police have to log it. We go a step further, we look for evidence of it. And the example I always give is, unfortunately, it happens, kids get mugged on their way home from school. Jewish kids get mugged on their way home from school. If a parent turns around and says, my kid was targeted because they are in their uniform from the local Jewish school, if that was reported to the police would log that as hate, as perception of hate, We wouldn't. We would be looking for actual language. Was anti-Semitic language used in that? We categorise our incidents, and this again is only anti-Semitic incidents, into 6 categories. Extreme violence, assault, damage and desecration, threats, abusive behaviour and literature. And they are in somewhat of a ranking order. So extreme violence is where there is loss of life, potential loss of life or life-changing injuries. Assault can be where an assault has happened or there is where there is intention of assault. So something being thrown at someone that it doesn't actually hit them, or being spat at and it doesn't land on them, that's assault as well. Damage and desecration relates specifically to Jewish-owned property, and threats can be verbal, written, email, social media. And abusive behaviour is a really wide-ranging subject because that includes graffiti that isn't on Jewish-owned property, which would be damage and desecration. So if you're walking down the road and you just see anti-Semitic graffiti on a lamppost, that would be abusive behaviour. But again, it's the more obvious abusive behaviour towards individuals as well. And literature refers specifically to mass mailing or mass stickering that happens at the same time or within a very, very close time frame. I'm going to go on and show you some examples of anti-Semitism. There is a warning on a video. There isn't anything majorly graphic, but this is to indicate to you the sort of incidents that we are dealing with every day. The first example I've got, this was actually sent to a website inquiry form for a synagogue, which is pretty self-explanatory. And the second example is over here, which is football related. So without the Achtung Juden at the bottom, this would be Millwall Football Club against Tottenham Football Club. Very common inter-football rivalry, and I'm getting daggers being made at me from Lauren, who is an avid Spurs supporter and is very happy with the outcome of yesterday's match. But with the inclusion of Achtung Juden, then that obviously makes it anti-Semitic. And that was, from the war, Achtung Juden, warning Jews. That comes from the Nazi regime over in 1940s Germany. So now I'm going to just show you a video, and there is some explicit language and some imagery. There is nothing violent or graphic, but it gives you an example of what we are dealing with. And these are all incidents that were recorded in 2021. Your rabbi, any chigwa? One other area that we have to look at is mental health and extremism. Quite often the police will pass something off as being mental health related. This is a synagogue in Exeter. The man that you see is smashing the window, his name is Tristan Morgan. He has been convicted of terrorism charges for this incident, but he has been detained indefinitely under the Mental Health Act. The size of the hole that he's smashing in the window, it's about the size of an orange. The reason for this is we have unfortunately learned of the impact of flying glass from terrorist incidents globally. So we have a scheme where we protect all the windows of our buildings to ensure that that doesn't happen in light of an explosion. And this is a really good example of that. I'm going to, it's the shortened version. I'm running out of time. So, but this is just a really important case study for us that you can have mental health, you can still be culpable of your actions, and the police have to take that seriously and not be guided by the mental health. Sorry?
Were there people inside?
No, sorry, I should say the synagogue was empty at the time. Yeah. We very quickly managed to retrieve CCTV of the guy's number plate who carried out a recce beforehand, and we handed that to the police. We handed that information to the police, and with half an hour of this incident he was arrested, and as he opened the door he said, "You'll hear about the arson attack, aren't you?" So he didn't even care, he knew he was going to get caught. Really important is the journey taken from anti-Semitism to terrorism, and this guy is a man called Sheroz Iqbal. He's now serving 8.5 years under terrorism charges, and it's important that we look at this because we believe he was responsible for a spate of incidents in 2016, 2017, those low-level anti-Semitic incidents that I referenced. That's what was happening here. There's various indicators within this that show us that it was the same person responsible, the language, the satchel, messenger bag, the bicycle he was riding. He then placed some posters up in the area of Gants Hill, which is in Essex. He was arrested for that. It's all right, it's my area as well. That's where I grew up. He was arrested, he was charged and convicted, and he received a suspended sentence from the judge. It was his third suspended sentence for an act of anti-Semitism. So it's a huge frustration within the CPS, within the Crown prosecution system, because it was his, like I say, it's his third suspended sentence. But the reason I bring that up is because shortly after he received the sentence, this happened. I'm going to fast forward it because it's a fair bit. But basically he's turned up back at the synagogue he'd been targeting and spoke to them through the intercom and said, I'm back, they couldn't keep me in. So we were really concerned at this because this is someone guilty of anti-Semitism, third suspended sentence, and carries on goading the community. We then started with our OSINT team looking into him and realised the people that he was associating with, including key figures from Al Muhajirun, were really alarming. So we produced this document and we sent that over to SO15, Counter-Terror Police, who began prioritising an internal response. We also put out security alerts to the synagogue and the nearby communities so that they were aware and could keep an eye on what was going on. And over the following several months, we monitored him very closely. We continued doing security advice and updates, and we started to spot a pattern of things happening, which led to 7 days of activity, which finally ended in him sharing ISIS material on Facebook, which was an offence. That was then passed back to SO15, and he was arrested and charged with 1 count of dissemination of terrorism material. We don't have this in a print copy because we produced it during COVID, but we do have it online, so the actual full case study is available, and it's really interesting and very worthwhile looking as it shows those steps of radicalisation from that anti-Semitism through to conviction of terrorism. Another example we've got is this. At the end of the Middle East conflict last year, this man was seen walking through Golders Green in North London with a Free Palestine t-shirt on, or so we were told. And as Elliot pointed out, you know, saying Free Palestine, it's your democratic right to fight for a cause, but it's just if it became anti-Semitic that we would have concerns with it. However, he wasn't just wearing a Free Palestine t-shirt, he's actually wearing the emblem of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is a prescribed terrorist organisation, and by doing so, he was committing an offence. He was arrested and convicted under terrorism charges as well. Very quickly, looking at the far right, 2 consecutive weeks. I'm out of time. Shall I do this one and then we're done? Okay, right. Over 2 consecutive weeks last year, we had reports of far-right activity in North West London area with these particular stickers. The caricature is the Happy Merchant, which is an anti-Semitic meme, heavily used on far-right networks, so mainly within those social media platforms that the far-right access. So the police look at it, see an offensive sticker, don't really understand the meaning behind it. We bridge that gap in their learning. We advise them why this was so offensive and why it's so problematic, and that it's not just a sticker, that this is an indication that we have a far-right extremist operating in the North West London area, and what is their next step going to be. For a 2-week period, we had police actually positioned within our office to try and apprehend him, because he was also responsible for stickers in another borough, which was outside a Jewish school. The poster there that's been ripped off said White Lives Matter. White Lives Matter is not an organisation, it's a response to the Black Lives Matter movement, and it's a slogan predominantly used again by far-right extremists. So CCTV control room was able to capture him doing this, and like I say, this led to a police operation here in our office. And the final one I'll show you is, which links into what Elliot's been saying about the age. Is that not playing properly? Okay, so the age of these people that are carrying out some of these offences is really quite alarming and worrying, and it's a shame this isn't playing because takes it back, there we go. So this is a kid that's like 13 years old, 14 years old, and she goes up to a house to perform a swastika, to perform a Nazi salute.
Is this just a Jewish house in North London?
Jewish house in Hertfordshire.
So she spots them as
Yeah, we don't know if they did it to other houses going down the street as well. We can presume they did, but this was the only one that captured it on a Ring doorbell. I'm out of time.
You are a little bit. I'm just going to tell you that.
Johnny?
Yeah, we're going to...
We could add another 10 or 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah? I got a little bit more before it goes into Yoni, and it's just about Month of Hate.
Okay.
Yeah? Okay. Here we go. Okay, the Month of Hate, which has already been referenced, is directly to do with the conflict in the Middle East last year. To give you an idea of the numbers that we were looking at in the incident. So the first column is the 4 weeks before the conflict began, and we took in that time 133 anti-Semitic incidents and 28 reports that fell into like other not anti-Semitic categories. If we look at the same period of time but before COVID, so there were no restrictions in place, what we were dealing with on a kind of a normal average 4-week period was about 172 incidents. So you can see, obviously, pandemic, non-pandemic, we're looking at around the same sort of figures. But if we look at the next column, which is 2014, that's an 8-week period of the last conflict in the Middle East, which was over the summer months of July and August. And during those 8 weeks, we recorded 546 anti-Semitic incidents with 205 other reports. And what that looks like during the Month of Hate, during half the time frame, we recorded an astounding 628 anti-Semitic incidents in a 4-week period with 187 other reports, which is a 365% increase of anti-Semitic incidents from the 4 weeks prior to the conflict. School incidents were immense. They happened at a really alarming rate. We never dealt with anything like this before. These are all things that were shouted either at teachers or at students. We put in place the programme that Johnny referenced at the beginning, Stand Up. It had amazing results. A lot of it was just misdirected political activism that they didn't know how to direct it properly. So with a bit of education and guidance, they're able to do so and kind of engage in meaningful conversation. But obviously there were some that were incredibly alarming as well. We had an example of a quite serious assault against Rabbi Godwin from Chigwell Synagogue in Essex. In fact, the trial was last week, and one of the attackers, one had charges dropped and one has been convicted and has received a custodial sentence as a result of his actions. Luckily, Rabbi Godwin wasn't attacked, didn't sustain too severe injuries and has made a full recovery. Obviously, this you saw before, which was the most alarming incident out of the conflict, which was the car travelling down Finchley Road in North London, shouting the threats that you heard in the previous video, and the fact that this then kind of gained so much momentum on social media, that caused a huge amount of alarm to the community. We had incitement from UK-based jihadists on a Shabbat, a Sabbath. 3 Islamist YouTube influencers performed a provocative stunt in Golders Green, in the heart of the Orthodox Jewish community, where they stopped and filmed Jewish people in the street and challenged them to answer questions about the conflict in Israel and Gaza to the backdrop of a van showing quite distressing images from the Holocaust. And the following day, one of them helped lead a counter-demonstration against a pro-Israel rally in London, where he gave an aggressive speech which stated, "For us, we believe that death begins. We believe that life begins at death. We don't care about death. We love death." And we saw examples of posters with offensive messages and slogans as well, and including chants that were being shouted. And again, this is going back to what Johnny says. The protests themselves is not what we have a concern with. The protests is people's democratic right to talk about a cause that they feel so strongly and passionately about. What they can't do is display acts of anti-Semitism within that, and that needs to be taken really seriously. There you go. I got it covered. I'm now going to hand over to Yoni. As I said, Yoni's our data analyst. He's the author of our annual incidents report and our 6 monthly report, as well as some other documents that we produce throughout the year, and he's going to talk to you a bit more about the analysis.
Thank you. Keep it around 10 minutes, and then 10 minutes of questions, and then we'll go down.
Sure.
Thanks, Yoni. Sorry.
No, it's all right. Hi, everyone. I'm Yoni. As Sam said, I'm the data analyst at CST. As she also mentioned, we recently published our 6 monthly incident report, which goes through all of the anti-Semitic incidents that we recorded, that were reported to us throughout the first half of this year. Every single one of those incidents goes through an analysis process, which leads to the figures and trends that I'll talk about a bit today, which are obviously part of this year's analysis, but really transcend any year. It's anti-Semitism. It's pretty consistent across the board. It develops with the times, of course, but what we see is nothing particularly new. So I'll try and keep it short and sweet. In the first half of this year, we recorded 786 anti-Semitic incidents. It's actually a 43% drop from the 1,371 reported in the first half of 2021, which was the record total. As Sam's spoken about, we had the month of hate there. That is the total sparked by a major trigger event in the Middle East. And what we see in this decrease is the difference between a year where there has been a major trigger event and one where there hasn't. This is still significant. As you'll see, it's our joint 5th highest ever 6 monthly total. It's more than 100 incidents reported every single month. For some context, between 2006 and 2016, only on 6 occasions were more than 100 incidents reported in any given month. Again, usually correlating with some kind of major global trigger event that inspires the expression of hatred against Jews in the UK. This is the new normal now. This is what we expect. This is regular. Over 100 incidents every month, and round about this number between 700 and 900 incidents reported in the first half of a year. In terms of categories, Sam's already gone through them, so I won't go through them again, but these are the numbers for this year. Relatively speaking, these are proportions typical of a non-pandemic time. Not that the pandemic's over, but in terms of restrictions in the UK, they haven't affected life in general in the first half of this year, compared to the first half of each of the previous 2 years, when it did affect how people were interacting, what people were able to do in public. The proportions are back to what they were before, so that means in the category of assaults, That is now 9% of the overall total. Typically over the last 2 years we were seeing 6 or 7%, but it shows that now that things are more or less back to normal in terms of public behaviour, the opportunity and potential for people to target Jews with physical attacks is ripe again, and so people are doing that. People are acting on that potential. Just briefly speaking, in terms of geography, London and Manchester are the two areas in the UK with the largest Jewish populations, and naturally, as always, the most anti-Semitic incidents take place in those areas. The combined proportion in the first half of this year is actually larger than it has been for the last couple of years. It's 72% of incidents happen in just London and Manchester. For example, in the first half of last year it was only 69%. Again, this may be a reflection of the fact that now that in-person anti-Semitism can happen more easily than it could in the last couple of years. People are targeting, once again, the Jewish communities at a higher rate than they have been. Of course, this is still a pretty widespread. There is not significant Jewish community in every part of the country, although there is some in a lot of places. But only 8 police constabularies in the UK didn't record a single incident in the first half of this year. And again, part of that is due to the role that online and social media platforms play in facilitating hate speech, in giving people the opportunity to direct their hatred far and wide, as well as a much more kind of localized level of abuse. Apart from London and Manchester, the highest number of incidents recorded in Boreham Wood and Elstree, which is in Hertfordshire, just north of London, Gateshead, where there's also a significant Orthodox community in Northumbria, Liverpool in Merseyside, and Leeds in West Yorkshire as the cities not in London and Manchester. As colleagues have touched on before, a quite worrying trend that we've noticed initially started last year, but go into this year too, is that there's a high proportion of incidents involving children either as victims or as offenders. The 16% of minors that are victims is significantly higher than what we would see at least before last year, when it was usually around 9 or 10%. Offenders also were typically around 9 or 10% who were children, whereas now it's up to 21%. This, as I said, is a trend that started last year when, as Sam mentioned, there was a lot of school-based anti-Semitism. Funnily enough, what we've seen this year is that there's been a reduction in a number of incidents happening in schools or a school context, whether that's Jewish schools, non-Jewish schools, affecting kids on their way to and from their places of education. And yet, there are still more children involved on either side of anti-Semitic incidents. It's possible to infer that while the conflict that happened, the month of hate, might have inspired a level of anti-Jewish hate or people to misdirect anti-Jewish hate because they didn't know how to appropriately express their political ideas or direct it. It's actually something more substantial than that. It's not just people who are jumping on a bandwagon or supporting a certain cause. There's a theme that runs deeper than that. And another kind of worrying edge to this is that child offenders are more likely to employ some kind of politicized, extremist or conspiracist discourse in their abuse than adult offenders. In fact, in 53% of incidents where the offenders were minors, there was some kind of rhetoric of this kind that was used. And within that, the most common seemed to reference the Holocaust. Nazis used Nazi-era propaganda, Hitler, glorifying the Holocaust, denying the Holocaust, punctuating their abuse with, as you saw, Nazi salutes or swastikas and graffiti, and other such things. And I'll show you some. You've already seen the Ring doorbell, so I won't play this. I'll just play this voice message which was left on the voicemail of a Jewish organisation.
That's not true, it's not one. can talk, I am Hitler. I take you to Auschwitz, kill all the Jews.
I won't play the other things because we don't really have time. But as you can see, there is this extremist edge to young anti-Semitism, if we can call it that. And again, maybe linking into what Elliot spoke about earlier, the way that sort of far-right extremism seems to be mobilized on social media platforms may play a part in this trend that we're seeing now crop up to the surface level of anti-Semitism, the things that are reported to us every day at CST. Finally, just to touch on another theme of anti-Semitism that we've seen over the last few years, where whatever the sort of topic highest on the global news agenda seems to be, anti-Semites will weaponize that as a channel to express their abuse. So over the last few years we've seen that with COVID, but now more and more that discourse is diminishing as restrictions have lifted here and is less on people's mind, and the uncertainty of it all has maybe vanished a little. It's moving into I suppose, one of the many latest big news stories of the year, which is of course the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And we're seeing discourses pop up from all over the place, all different strands, using different ideologies. You can see here, whether it's conspiracies of Jewish power, Jewish people being sort of in high-profile positions on both sides of the war, somehow managing the situation. Whoops, it's a bit early, sorry. Whether it's people comparing Russia to the evil of Zionist Israel, using that very kind of euphemistic language. And again, we do not consider every anti-Zionist incident or every anti-Israel incident to be anti-Semitic, but we can sort of tell when it is. Or whether it's other incidents which aren't visibly available. But we had one where a Jewish person was told that Hitler wasn't that bad and what Putin is doing is analogous to Hitler, but how they're actually both kinds of forces of good for the world. And of course this, which I think was initially a Banksy piece of graffiti, which has been corrupted with, there's a swastika drawn on the arm of the child and also Rothschild written on the suitcase with money coming out of it, Rothschild being another conspiracy theory relating to disproportionate Jewish financial power and influence over the world. And this, even though it's a small sample, I think kind of perfectly showcases what anti-Semitism is today in terms of the spectrum of discourses that you see, in terms of how tropes that we all are familiar with from other events and other periods of history being recycled for the modern day, and how anti-Semites turn to and manipulate modern day events as a channel for their hatred. Is that all right? So that's that. That's that from me. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Yoni, Sam, Elliot, everyone. We've got, I think, about 10 minutes before we go downstairs. Obviously, I don't want to get in between you and your lunch, which is the most important part of the day. But we can answer any comments or questions between us and Passion.
Yeah, I have a question about how the online space fits in with incident reporting. So I'm fairly active on Twitter and I get a huge amount of very overt Jew hatred. I'm not reporting it. I don't report it to Twitter either, I just blog. But is there a mechanism for CST to be, I mean, I don't know, is it monitoring that? I mean, what is it?
So we have a social media caseworker. His role is literally just all the incidents that happen online. Now people use social media to report incidents that have happened offline, but his role is purely to focus on the hatred that's happening on the mainstream social media channels. So we're looking at Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, oh I missed that, YouTube. Report them to us. Okay. We have very strict guidelines with regarding what we record. So either the victim or the offender has to be UK based. So if somebody reports to us something that's happened in America, they're not the victim, they've just seen it, they're not the direct victim, there's not much that we can do in terms of recording it, but we will still flag it with social media platforms. So if you're getting a barrage of abuse, then yes, absolutely report that to us. We have trusted status with the social media platforms. Theoretically, what that should mean is that if we report something to the platforms, they will sit up and pay more attention because they know that we've already done some sort of triaging on it, have realised that actually it does meet their threshold, and therefore they should act upon that. Doesn't always work, but we will then escalate that further as well. So it's absolutely worth it, and yes, blocking as well.
Hi, I would like to ask you, what do you do about anti-Semitism from very young people? Do you report it to their homes, to schools? What happens?
It depends on the incident. It depends on where it's coming from. Yeah. So that example of the girl at the house was reported to the police. There's only, in that particular area, there's only one non-Jewish state school. Although she wasn't in uniform, the chances are she's a local girl, she probably goes to that school. The police went to the head teacher who did identify her, and then they deal with it by whatever means is necessary. So if it's like a first offence, then she'll be requested to take part in some sort of educational programme.
Yeah.
We've got other examples of a similar age group of young boys drawing swastikas on the local synagogue in the same area. They were identified. They don't go through the criminal justice system. They go through a youth engagement process. They're sitting down with a Holocaust survivor to be educated as to why drawing a swastika.
I mean, this is linked, it's sort of linked into the question we had before from the gentleman with the moustache. Sorry, I don't know your name. So, Ben, your most defining feature. You know, you've got to be careful, right? 13, 14, 15-year-old kids, right? Do you criminalise them? Right? Do you push them towards extremism? Do you look for softer touches? Do you do it through a school? Do you do it through the family? And again, that's always what we consider, right? And look for the most appropriate type of intervention.
If you can help, I'm from Canada, where these kinds of statistics that are generated by Jewish groups are viewed with hostility and suspicion, and believe that they're overblown, you're counting the same thing twice, you're counting things that don't really matter. Do you receive those kinds of charges, and how do you respond to them?
Who's from? Is it from people?
So I'm at a university, so leftist academics. Right. But also, if you talk to people publicly, they hear, oh, it's B'nai B'rith or Simon Wiesenthal, and they're just going to keep counting.
We have managed to avoid those charges through, sorry, I don't need to, through, we've been doing this since 1984. We are very open about our processes. We're very open about what we count as anti-Semitic and what we don't count as anti-Semitic. We are very open about that grey area between anti-Israel and anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, and where that very fuzzy line is, and it's subjective to some people, right, or to many people as well. And we, as I mentioned earlier, we present our analysis with no spin, and we are, I think, universally and widely respected for that. There are some other organisations that also present analysis and data and can be open to such charges, whether justified or not. I'm not here to make that call. But haters are going to hate, right? And there are some people that will always dismiss CST as a Mossad front, or right, or whatever it may be, right? Okay, and that element you ignore. But with regards to government, police, academics, the community, researchers, we have a really important reputation, which is key to us. And again, that's also what drives how we operate in order to maintain and keep that reputation. And this is all part of that as well. So
also, Johnny, if I may, just briefly, I know in the Canadian context and also in the United States, there isn't the infrastructure that the CST is created and the level of cooperation, not only with other communities, but with law enforcement agencies. And if anything, Canada does not have that infrastructure, and the argument among scholars would be made that very few instances are reported because people don't have access to report it. I know the radical left of Carleton says all sorts of stuff, but there isn't the infrastructure and the work that the CST is the model that Canada should import.
Did you want to answer to that?
I want to make a brief comment because I'm from the Muslim community in the UK, and since I learned about CST, which obviously wasn't as young as some people did, I've been incredibly impressed. And we've even spoken to people from CST ourselves, to get advice on what we need to do. And I've also done work with Tal Mama, who is also a partner, and obviously Tal Mama came out of looking at what CST did and what we can do as Muslims within our own community, because we have issues with anti-Muslim prejudice as well. So I mean, more power to you.
Gentleman in the blue shirt.
Okay.
You want to go down?
To see the.
Yeah. So 2 more questions. Okay. Sorry, and there was the lady in the. Sorry, everyone.
From the gentleman with the blue shirt. Yeah. Wonderful work you are doing. But my question more in collecting the material, for example, reporting, but also in surveilling social media, for example. How do you deal with the language barrier? So here we are in the UK. I suspect that you mainly deal with material in English. I wonder whether there is something that you do in from other languages, which may be still done from UK or targeting individuals. That's one. And second, you said something about social media. How much rapport do you have with them, and trust do you have them for them actually to take action? Because from another context, I know they don't.
I'll answer the second one first. Yes. We see ourselves as critical friends of the social media company. So we don't hold back criticism of Facebook or Twitter. The mainstream organisations that we deal with. Where the far right congregate, we stay away from, we don't engage with them, we kind of see them as hostile entities, GAB, 4chan, BitChute, all these sorts of places. But the mainstream social media platforms, we have got they are improving, but they are slow. Their community standards are improving. What they are saying is improving. The problem is with the enforcement of it. And we don't hold back by saying and by exposing that. But at the same time, we manage our relationships with them so that we can feed into that and we can help guide their community policies to better combat anti-Semitism. But it's an ongoing process and it's very difficult. There's also regulation about to come, so the online safety bill in the UK, which is being pushed back, but that will provide a legal framework and a legal regulation that we are also lobbying on, because we want to make sure to the best of our ability that it combats anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred, and that will bring another layer of regulation onto the social media platforms. With regards to the languages,
I mean, with languages,
We don't really get.
there aren't that many, but if a Jewish person in the UK was targeted with anti-Semitism that was written in another language, we'd either use the sort of automatic translation tool for ourselves to work out what's being said, but also there's, I think, within CST enough of a base of language knowledge for people to, in most cases, be able to translate the hostile abuse one way or another. So we to be honest, that's a good question. We've never had an issue with it, so I've never thought about it.
I can be easily anti-Semitic in Kinyarwanda, but that's another thing.
Last question, please, because we have to go down, and it was the lady in the blue dress, but we can converse as we're going down or outside.
Thank you so much. So I have a small question divided to 3. So, I mean, I remember working with you at the Friends of Regional Society at UCL. You were the point of contact. You have authority. You're doing really, really well. This is a success story. Coming from Norway, it's not the same in every country, definitely not. Do you think the power that you have comes also from the large established Jewish community in the UK, and especially in London? Second question that you can answer at the same time. Where is your money from exactly? Who funds you? Because you... Zion is one child. Wait a second, because also the government is not just the Zionists, and I would like to know what did you do to make them give you the money and authority to do things? And the third question is, we all have something in common, and we know very well what anti-Semitism is and what anti-Semitic incidents are. But how do you define it? Is there anything that you say, this is not anti-Semitic enough for me? I remember as president, we had all these like kind of questionable students who didn't know when to complain because they didn't think it was anti-Semitic enough to justify being unsafe. I remember when I was a student in summer 21, you know, I was not physically assaulted, but I was unsafe, and because of my experience also with you guys, I learned to identify and say this is anti-Semitic, but many people didn't believe me. So maybe if you could just comment on these three things first.
I can do that bit.
Yeah.
Okay. So is something anti-Semitic enough? For us, it's about the victim. It doesn't matter how small or minor or irrelevant they feel the incident is, or even if they don't know it is anti-Semitic or aren't sure, our message to the community is to still report it to us. We will then define that, and there are sometimes, we meet regularly, we meet, the incidents department meet with colleagues in our research and analysis department on a weekly basis, where we literally pull apart those incidents, and we will look for anything. And if between the group of us, who have many, many years of expertise in this area, we can't say that that is anti-Semitic, we won't record it for the sake of statistics. We will be honest and say there's just not enough for us to say that's anti-Semitic, so we won't record it, but we are literally analysing. I mean, it is Johnny's job on a day-to-day basis. He is analysing everything he's got. So it used to be a spreadsheet sheet, it's now all automated, where he's literally got boxes for everything to understand where that anti-Semitism is coming from.
Do you have any defense mechanism or defense strategy for almosts, for things that are still not right but don't necessarily fit your categories?
So it goes back to what we said about being evidence-led. If there is evidence of anti-Semitism, we'll record it. If it doesn't reach that, our internal kind of definition and threshold, then we won't. And if we're really, really not sure, and between us we can't, then it's too difficult to ascertain.
Very briefly, funding. We have an operating budget of between £6.5 and £7 million a year. About 95–98% of that is fundraised from charitable donations from within the Jewish community. We've got a very active trustee, very active board, very active fundraisers, and the community, as we've heard, not just from us, but from Harry and from other members of the Jewish community here, see the CST as being part of how they operate, how they engage in a fundamental part of Jewish life. So the Jewish community fund it.
Do you get money from the government as well?
So the money from the government is another £40 million, which goes directly to commercial security guards. We administer that on behalf of the government, right? So we have to go. So the government would have said, the government said we've got £40 million we want to give to the Jewish community. Either they can write 400 checks to their or they say to us, and